He was a beautiful person inside and out. Just kind heart. I'm not trying to say for 1 second that he was an angel.
Anthony Granger was 36. He had 2 young children and worked as a car mechanic. He lived in Manchester with his partner Gail.
And I remember just going back and actually sitting there and thinking, my life's perfect, I actually remember. And then he nipped out and he didn't come home.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
A man was shot dead last night in Cheshire after the car he was in was stopped by officers from Greater Manchester Police in a pre-planned operation. It happened in the village of Culcheth near Warrington. 2 men were arrested at the scene.
The victim was Anthony Granger. He'd been found guilty of handling stolen cars, but had no convictions for violence. The other men in the car were a different story. They did have convictions for violence, and the police saw one as a very dangerous criminal.
It was early Saturday evening back in March 2012 when armed officers swooped into this car park in unmarked cars. They were aiming for the corner, which is where Anthony Granger was sitting in the driver's seat. And what happened next is disputed. The police say that when they got here, Anthony had raised and then lowered his arms. They were worried that he was going for a gun. One of the officers had fired a shot and killed him. But we've talked to one of the other passengers in the car, and they said there was no warning, they didn't know it was armed police. The first thing they knew was a shot had come through the windscreen and had killed Anthony.
What is clear is that Anthony Granger didn't have a gun. Neither did anyone else in the car.
About 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, there was somebody knocking on the door, so I've come out and I've opened the door and I thought he'd forgot his keys. And it was one of his friends, and his friend just stood there looking at me. And he just went, "It's been shot." I thought, "What do you mean, been shot?" You know, we don't live in America. And then he said the police did it. And I just collapsed. But I didn't believe it, even up until I seen his body in the morgue.
The sleepy village of Culcheth is about the last place where you'd expect a shooting. It's somewhere John Buttress knows well. He's a former chief inspector with Greater Manchester Police. He was sacked over a mortgage fraud case, but later cleared by a jury. He claimed he was targeted after whistleblowing about bullying. This was denied by Greater Manchester Police and wasn't upheld by further investigations.
There you go.
Oh, that's lovely. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thanks. My son went to Scouts over there. His primary school is a few hundred yards down there. His secondary school just over there. The sweet shop that a lot of the kids used to come to is just over there.
So the idea of having armed police officers doing an operation here?
It's utterly wrong.
So why did the police shoot Anthony Granger? Earlier this year, a public inquiry was held into his death. It hasn't reported its findings yet, but during the evidence, we started to get some answers. Officers have been trailing Anthony Granger and his friends for weeks, convinced they were planning an armed robbery.
Are you with them now, pal?
The top detective on the operation was this man, Chief Inspector Robert Cousin, seen here back in 2011. He admitted making a mistake on the intelligence about Anthony Granger, but said it wouldn't have made any difference. There were still known violent criminals in the car. John Buttress says that's not good enough.
I'm disgusted. I genuinely am. The person who put together the intelligence brief, that person didn't collect the intelligence from the existing police systems, and that has ended up with a man shot dead in broad daylight.
But intelligence is only one part of the picture for firearms officers.
I did another one, it was a drugs raid on a flat about that high.
Tony Long knows what it's like to pull the trigger. He shot and killed 3 people during his 30-year career with the Metropolitan Police.
Yeah, we had a guardsman.
He says you can't just rely on someone's criminal record.
By definition, a good criminal is one that doesn't get caught. So, you know, if you look at the Granger case, you know, I understand that he had a criminal background, he hung around with criminals. Certainly the vehicle that they were driving was a stolen car where the plates had been swapped. The intelligence suggested, as I understand, that they were going to carry out a robbery. It looks now, with the benefit of hindsight, that they were probably just on another reconnaissance.
During the public inquiry, lawyers for Anthony Granger's family said the police had exaggerated his criminal record and the threat he posed. Greater Manchester Police firmly denied this, but admitted mistakes had been made. On the night of the operation, the firearms team had been on duty for 14 hours when they were told to move in. There were 16 firearms officers, all given code names to protect their identities. Several had failed training courses, and it was argued during the public inquiry they shouldn't have been on the operation. Greater Manchester Police disputed this.
I can't understand how that can happen. A force such as Manchester has got resilience, so there shouldn't be a reason why somebody who's involved in a firearms job who wasn't trained to carry out their role.
Martin Harding spent 14 years on the front line as a firearms officer with the Greater Manchester Force and still works as a consultant for the police.
It was very much a male-dominated environment, lots of testosterone. It was very close-knit. The nature of the role meant it had to be close-knit. You had to be able to trust your partners and your teammates 200%.
But has this macho environment gone too far? It emerged during the public inquiry the shooter, the officer known as Q9, had seriously injured a suspect during an arrest. And it was also revealed he'd been previously disciplined for assaulting 2 people. He was cleared of 10 other separate assault allegations and remained as a firearms officer.
To have that number of complaints would raise concerns. When you've got an officer who's in a role such as a firearms officer with a significant number of complaints, somebody's got to look at that managerially and decide if that is the right place for you.
Ultimately, Q9 told the inquiry he fired the shot because he thought his life and those of his fellow officers were in danger. Tony Long has met Q9. They're part of the tiny group of officers who've carried out fatal shootings.
He seemed just like a really decent guy, just quiet, steady. If the perception by his movements, by his body language, is such that he's going for a gun or he's got hold of a gun, and you think that your colleagues or a member of the public's life is in danger, then you know you are duty bound to act on that decision and do what you've been trained to do.
This wasn't the last serious case Q9 was involved in. We've discovered there was another incident where his conduct was called into question after Anthony Granger's death. All of the firearms officers involved in the Granger case were granted anonymity, so we can't talk about this other case in detail. The questions for Greater Manchester Police go to the top of the force. During the public inquiry, an Assistant Chief Constable apologised for changing his record of the operation leading up to Anthony Granger's death, and a senior firearms officer had destroyed his notes when he retired a year after the shooting.
It would be unusual. There's lots of stuff you get rid of yourself, but there's things that you don't get rid of. And pocketbooks and notes of that nature are not one of the things that you would get rid of.
Anthony Granger's partner, Gail, is still grieving, waiting for the case to end. But we've discovered that the police watchdog has launched a new investigation into his killing. It's the second time the Independent Police Complaints Commission has looked into this case, which is incredibly rare. They told us they're examining evidence given at the public inquiry.
My life is on hold. It's been on hold, and it's still on hold now. The police have determined what's happening with Anthony's life. and they're dictating what's happening in my life. I don't want anybody to have to go through the pain and the upset and the just what we've been through as a family.
But this isn't the first time that questions have been raised about firearms officers at Greater Manchester Police.
We bought it for Ian for his 18th birthday. It was a birthday present. He'd always wanted a yellow Beetle. So when I feel quite close to Ian, when we're in the Beetle, almost as if he's with us, we can just picture him driving it, you know, and how pleased he was when he got it in the first place, when he got it as a birthday present.
Ian Terry was devoted to his family and his job as a firearms officer with Greater Manchester Police.
He was full of fun, he was a caring person, but I think the thing that stands out most of all was his enthusiasm for life and everything he did. He absolutely adored his wife and children, and he loved his job.
Behind me is the Sharp project. This is home to lots of small businesses now, but back in 2008, this was just a disused factory, and it was the ideal location for firearms officers to do a practice exercise. And it was here that PC Ian Terry had volunteered to play the role of a baddie. But what was unusual on this day was they were going to use live rounds, and it was a decision that would go horribly wrong.
Shot dead on duty. A policeman is killed during firearms training in Manchester.
We were told that they'd been involved in an accident at work, and that everyone had done all they could, but they couldn't save him.
Ian Terry had been shot by an officer using a shotgun loaded with a so-called rip-round cartridge, deadly at close range. He died within minutes. The police watchdog was scathing. It said the case was a shocking wake-up call for Greater Manchester Police Firearms Unit. An inquest jury in 2010 ruled that Ian Terry had been unlawfully killed, and that he would have been saved if the training had been properly prepared.
The training exercise had been over-engineered, if you like. They'd made it rather too dangerous. And really, certain elements in there should not have happened altogether.
One former officer agrees with this.
I thought we were getting a little bit too much into the aggressive tactics.
John Foxcroft ran the firearms training unit at Greater Manchester, but left over safety concerns in 2006.
I thought they were exposing some possible dangers, and they wouldn't listen to me, so I left. The more aggressive you get, the more likely you are to have people shot.
2 years after John left the unit, Ian Terry was killed.
I don't think you can underestimate it, really. You know, I've seen a great deal in 30 years of policing, and I've been involved with firearms a lot, but I never envisaged a situation where a police officer would end up shooting another police officer by accident or anything else. It shouldn't have happened.
The Crown Prosecution Service said there wasn't enough evidence to bring criminal charges against any officers. The Greater Manchester Police was fined for health and safety offences. In 2014, one of the officers who organised the training was fired from the force. The man who shot Ian Terry was disciplined, but still works for the police.
We would have liked there to have been rather more disciplinary action against the officers who ran the exercise. And even the officer, despite, I mean, he was a good friend of Ian. It was just, and he just couldn't explain why he'd gone with all that was happening. He'd just gone into what he would have done in a live situation. We got the impression that the firearms officers were more or less allowed to just to get on and do their own thing.
John Buttress has met the two police officers who organised the ill-fated training.
they had borne some responsibility. But everybody else involved needs to accept their portion of the blame, and it simply hasn't happened. There were a number of officers who failed in their duty, and a police officer, a very talented individual who I knew personally, was dead as a result.
But Ian Terry's family think Greater Manchester Police responded well.
We've been treated as well as they could possibly have done by GMP. I think there were mistakes made by just a small number of officers on the day.
Incredibly, we've discovered there's another new investigation by the police watchdog, this time into the Ian Terry case, 9 years after he was killed. We understand it follows fresh complaints about what happened on the day of the shooting. And there's another controversial case where someone was killed, again involving armed officers from Greater Manchester, but in very different circumstances. Jordan Begley was 23. He worked in an ice cream factory near his home in Gorton in Manchester.
Fun, bubbly person, hard working, family man, loved his mum, loved his little brother. He loved football, he loved Man United, loved going to all the games. He loved that. That was his passion, Man United.
But on the night of his death, Jordan Begley had a drunken argument with his neighbours and was threatening to attack them with a knife. So his mum called the police.
Right, I need the police here as quick as I can, please.
As soon as we've got
Jordan, just stay there, you're not going out.
A patrol officer calmed him down. Then other officers arrived, 11 in total. Jordan Begley was tasered and restrained by armed police. He was punched while he was on the ground and died from heart failure.
It was a shock because they didn't need that many officers for one person. You know, he was harmless, like, wouldn't hurt a fly, so it's like, why do you need all these officers when they could have been elsewhere helping other people?
At his inquest, the jury found that police failings played a part in his death and said he'd been unlawfully killed.
We were really close. He's a year older than me, so obviously it was like I lost not only a cousin but a friend as well.
The police were initially cleared of any blame, but after the inquest, the police watchdog quashed their first report and started a new investigation, which had never been done before.
Someone actually believes us and someone will do something about it. You know, we can go somewhere now, we can do something about it. Someone's got to say sorry, they've got to. And that's what we want.
This isn't about the past. Many of the officers in these cases are still serving, and the new investigations are ongoing. These cases pose tough questions for Greater Manchester Police.